It's September 18th, 1440 in Nantes, France. A poor, worried mother stands before church officials and Bishop Jean de Malistoit's inquiry to give sworn testimony. Her 10-year-old son hasn't come home. Neighbors said he'd been taken by a man in a fine coat and led through the gate of a great lord's residence. That boy would never be seen again. The man accused? Baron Gilles de Rais, Marshal of France, and one of the richest men in Europe, the one-time protector and sworn companion of the patron saint of France. But this is only the opening salvo in a very dark opera. Gilles would eventually confess to the murder and dismemberment of hundreds of children. Welcome to the Time and Tales podcast. We do dark history, strange lore, one tale at a time. And it's our second maiden voyage because our first didn't really work out so well. But now that we got this kind of figured out, we're going to be doing this every week, and we will bring you the spookiest tidbits from history and folklore, what's known, what's debated, and why the story endures. If macabre facts, eerie fables, and 4 a.m. rabbit holes are your natural habitat, you're in the right place. New episodes come out every week, wherever you listen. As always, sources and links can be found in the show notes. So hi guys, I'm Lene.
Hey, I'm CJ.
And we're here to tell you a very messed up story that I hope that you will enjoy. We had actually recorded an entire episode that we couldn't use because we just couldn't figure out the sound. So please forgive us if the sound isn't perfect. We are doing our best. CJ, are you really sad that we didn't get to keep that episode?
It was a lot of fun, but it was a learning experience. It's for the best that one gets put into the archives.
The retired episode.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun. It was a good time. We should do that episode again, but with the knowledge we have now.
Yes, I agree. We will be doing that one again. And I'm not going to tell you guys what it was, but it was great. So I guess a little backstory is in order. I am Lene, also known as L.M. Revere, and I have written 4 books that are published now. The Innisfail Cycle Trilogy and also A Darkmost Fair, and I have another book coming out in February. And they are all very creepy, dark fantasies and fairy tales.
I have known Lene for a number of years. For the entire time, she has been telling me about true crime and spooky murders, mostly murder, a lot of murders. So when she asked me to do this, I knew what I was getting into. It should be fun.
Well, that's about it for the intros. Let's go ahead and get to the story, shall we? You ready?
I am.
All right, let's do it. We begin this tale in the Pays de Rais, the marsh belt south of the Loire estuary. Gilles de Rais, born around 1404, inherits the barony of Rais and a web of lordships with castles including Machecoul, near the marsh, Tiffauges, above the Sèvres Nantes, and Champtocé, towards the Loire heartland. Gilles and his younger brother René were orphaned young, and they both grow up under the tutelage of their grandfather, the infamous Jean de Craon, learning brutality as a policy fairly early on. Heir to 3 massive fortunes, Gilles was not only a knight trained to soldier in the Duke of Brittany's service, he was also reportedly one of the richest young men in Europe, boasting a fortune larger than even the duke he served, and through him, the Dauphin of France. Handsome, disgustingly rich, born to privilege none of us could dare dream of, Gilles seemed to have been born under a fortunate star indeed. Pair this with a personal standing army of nearly 200 knights, combined with a well-documented brilliance for military command, it would be pretty hard to argue with this assessment. But one thing is definite. By the time he makes it to the French court of the Dauphin in 1429, he was already considered one of the most dangerous young men in France. France and England have been at war for over 100 years. Since 1337, the Valois kings of France and the Plantagenet kings of England have fought over claims to the French crown. 2 major events set the stage. In 1415, at Agincourt, Henry V of England defeats a larger French force opening Normandy. Between the years of 1419 and 1420, the Treaty of Troyes disinherits the Dauphin and recognizes Henry V as heir to Charles VI. By the late 1420s, Paris is under Anglo-Burgundian control. The Loire is a front line. Orléans is under siege, and the Dauphin, Charles, maintains a razor-thin grip on the court at Chinon. Miles away from the centers of power, a girl named Jeanne Le Pucelle, also known as Joan of Arc, comes from a village called Domremy in the foothills of the Alps. Born around 1412, she grows up where Burgundian raids and English forays mark the seasons. As a teenager, she speaks of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret, commanding her to save France from the English and see Charles VII crowned king.
Okay, okay. So why isn't Charles the king already? Wasn't he the king, or does he become the king?
He will become the king, but he is not the king at the moment because his father did not make him his official heir.
Okay. Well, what exactly is a dauphin? My French is very good.
I mean, neither of our French is very good, but so to be dauphin, that means that you are the heir to the throne of France, but he hasn't been officially recognized by his father. His father, Charles VI, actually believed he was made of glass.
Like actual glass?
Like actual glass.
Wait, so Charles VI thought he himself was made of glass?
100%.
Okay. Without going on a tangent, is there any evidence to back this up that he was made of glass?
Charles VI was actually a very, very interesting character. There are a lot of really incredibly unfortunate and strange incidents that happen at court with Charles VI. Mysterious fires, mysterious deaths, all kinds of misfortune. And after a while, his mental health declines to the point where he can no longer be in the company of other people in his court. So when he eventually dies, I don't necessarily think that it's he refused to declare Charles his official heir. I think it's that he probably just forgot.
Okay, so he's dead now? So nobody
He's dead by the time of this story, but because he didn't leave an official heir, that gives Henry V of England, for example, a claim to the throne of France.
Oh, I'm getting a lot of good background here.
Yes. So these families are, the Plantagenets and the Valois are very closely related. And there's also a lot of close relations with the Burgundians. It's a huge hot mess. And these people all think that they have a claim or some kind of claim to either the English, the French, or whatever throne, So and Charles isn't everybody's favorite. Henry V is like the golden boy. So he's up against it, and not everybody likes him, and not everybody wants him declared king. And at this time, we're at the end of the 100 Years' War, which is really 116 years. Thank you so much, Last Podcast on the Left, for that. So many cities had changed hands multiple times, and there's siege after siege after siege after siege. And the people of France are so sick of the fighting and paying tithes and giving up all of their food and their wealth and being raided to, knights from various places that just march into an area and say, hey, this is mine now. And then they fight somebody else. They lose that territory and the next group comes in and does it. So by the time we meet Joan, so that would be Joan d'Arc, she's lived in a place that has been raided by the Burgundians for a very, very long time. And I have to stress this, she hates them with the fire of 1,000 suns. And it's important to note that the Burgundians are allied with the English. When she goes to meet Charles at court, which we'll get to in a second, she is, I would say, very fixated on getting the Burgundians out of her home country. In early 1429, she reaches Vauclair, persuades Robert de Baudricourt to send her on, and rides to Chinon for an audience with Charles. Everywhere she goes, the people believe that she is touched by God, and adding to her holy mystique, by the time she gets to Chinon, without hesitation, she picks monkish Charles out of a sea of beautifully garbed nobles and drops to the floor, begging for His Majesty's mercy.
So Charles was a monk?
No, Charles was a shabby dresser. He did dress like a monk, and he had his hair cut and a tonsure.
Okay, so this is the Charles we were just talking about, like a guy who has syphilis. Okay. So, but also for my information, the major feud at this time is between Henry, who is trying to be king, Charles, who wants to be king, and the third faction. What's the name of those people?
Okay, so it's kind of like a three-way beef, right? So you've got England on one side, you have France on the other side, and then in France itself, you have the Burgundians from Burgundy. They believe that they're entitled to the throne. So Henry, at this point, Henry V, is dead. England is fighting on behalf of his son, who is a child. So back with Jeanne at Chinon, when she is bowing to Charles VII and calling him Your Majesty, Gilles de Rais was in that crowd, and he was awed by the burning righteousness in the girl's eyes, just like everyone else. He would write sometime later how profoundly moved he was by the experience, and Charles VII was wise enough not to look a potential PR gift horse in the mouth. He gives her the army she asks for. She receives armor, a white standard bearing Jesus and Mary, and an escort down in Loire towards Orléans. Whether he actually expected her to retake France or not With France losing the war and Paris out of reach, he perhaps thought that he had nothing else to lose. At Orléans, Jeanne changes the pace. On 4th of May, the French take Saint-Lô, and on the 6th of May, they push to Saint-Jean-le-Blanc. At dawn on the 7th of May, they assault Les Tourelles, the English bridgehead on the south bank. In the trench below the walls, Jeanne is wounded, taking an arrow between her neck and shoulder, and she's carried back while the attack stalls. By evening, she returns with her banner. The push resumes. That is to say that this young girl who is not a soldier, has never trained as a soldier, is not a knight, is riding into battle, taking wounds, and it doesn't stop her. She gets back up, gets on that horse, and leads them to victory at Les Tourelles. And on the 8th of May, 1429, the English withdraw, and the siege is over. This young girl had inspired the men to do the one thing they hadn't been able to do for years. Around her you see the same ring: Dunois, La Hire, Jean de Brosse, Saintré, and Gilles de Rais, riding close and listed among the commanders of the Loire offensive. On 17th July 1429, Charles VII is anointed at Rennes. Soon after, Gilles de Rais receives the baton of Marshal of France. So Charles is now officially King of France, and it's because of a girl. I'm not saying that he wouldn't necessarily have achieved the crown eventually, or that his army wouldn't eventually kick the English out of Orléans. But I will say that Jean definitely sped up the timeline quite a bit for them and made it a lot easier. It gave the army something to believe in again. But for our boy Gilles, this was the highest point of his life. After Charles is anointed king, the army turns toward Paris. Through late August, the columns edge north, and on September 8th, 1429, they assault the walls. Jeanne is hit in the thigh by a crossbow bolt and refuses to leave until night, and the ladders are pulled back.
Okay, so they've gone past Orleans and they're in Paris now, right?
Right. They're in Paris and they're attacking the walls. Like, Paris is a walled city. So it has high stone walls and it's surrounded by a moat on many, many sides. And at that time, Jeanne had been leading the charge. She was climbing up the ladder, screaming, yelling, waving her banner, and she gets hit in the thigh with a crossbow bolt and falls off the ladder, so the French army retreats a bit. And this is right around the point when the army starts to lose a little bit of faith in Jeanne, and on top of that, Charles, who decides it might be in his best interest to start speaking to the Burgundians and the English about a treaty. With Jeanne injured, she is unable to lead the army any further for a while, and everybody starts to kind of leave. The army eventually withdraws to Saint-Denis, where Jeanne leaves a set of armor before the shrine, and then further south to the Loire. Captains peel to their regions, and Gilles de Rais, newly made Marshal of France, rides home towards his Breton estates as the season closes.
Okay, so the big prize here was Paris, right?
Yes.
And they didn't take it.
No.
Okay, so how long were they there?
I'm not entirely sure. I'd have to look through my notes one more time, but I think they were there for at least a couple of days. And the siege went sour as soon as she took a crossbow bolt to the thigh. Everybody kind of gave up at that point.
So she's bedridden, or she's not on the battlefield, leading them to victory.
Right.
Then what does the army do? You said that they went back?
They just kind of kick rocks, They just kind of say, oh, well, I guess we're not going to take Paris today. The English are on top of the walls the entire time, shouting down at Jeanne, calling her all kinds of horrible names, most of them beginning with a W, just hurling abuse at the French. And they've got the high ground, they've got the high walls, they've got the weaponry to keep the city for endless weeks and months, potentially years. And the French army knows this. And if they don't have the verve, if they don't have the energy that Jeanne brings to the party, they're just not going to take the city. That's how they feel about it.
Okay. So she is absolutely necessary to their success in taking Paris.
I don't know that she's absolutely necessary, but I do know that she was a definite galvanizing force for the French army. And if she is not on the battlefield encouraging them to retake France for God, then there's not as much skin involved in that game. You know what I mean?
Right. They're not going to put their lives on the line to go get some city for some guy that they like. But what's the point if they're dead? But God, there's certainly some, I guess, payback, even if they die.
Right. Well, think about it. Like, if Jean really is a representative of God, then they're destined to take the city. That's like it's a shot of courage juice, like in Big Trouble in Little China. I'm feeling kind of invincible. It's because you got an agent of the Lord on your side. But when the agent of the Lord is in bed with a crossbow wound, you don't really feel as confident. She's off the walls. God isn't in the house. They don't feel like being shot in the face by an English crossbow for a battle they will likely lose.
What is Joan of Arc doing right now?
After being laid up with her wound, she's unable to fight, so she kind of just goes to a small town, and during her downtime, she's spending that pestering Charles, letter after letter, messenger after messenger, demanding that he help her remove the Burgundians from France. She's writing letters to the Burgundians over and over again, calling them pig dogs, and she's just really getting belligerent against the Burgundians. And at this point, Charles is really trying to set up a peace treaty because he and his entire country have been at war for 116 years. So to Charles, she's becoming a bit of a liability. She won't be quiet, and she won't put the dress back on and go home. She won't do any of the things that he and his nobles are hoping that she's going to do at this stage. But since Jeanne is not cooperating, he is going to have to look at another way to get rid of her.
Is this where the High Marshal Gilles de Rais comes in?
So Gilles de Rais has actually gone home. He's gone home to his own lands. So he isn't there to help her when on the 23rd of May, 1430, outside Compiègne, Jeanne is captured by Burgundian forces under Jean de Luxembourg. She is held, then sold to the English. In Rouen, within the archiepiscopal palace, an ecclesiastical court dominated by Bishop Pierre Cochin, a joint tribunal between the Burgundians and the English try her for heresy. And here's a fun fact. Most of the women in Europe who were burned as heretics instead of witches. So they couldn't get her with any, how should I say this, corporeal crimes. They could only get her on the belief that she was hearing voices from God and from the saints, and she refused to wear dresses or behave or comport herself like a girl. And then they made the claim that all of her saints were in fact demons, and that's how you get a charge of heresy that will eventually cause her death. On the 30th of May, 1431, Jeanne is executed in the Vieux Marché. In the records that survive, Gilles de Rais is not present at Compiègne, not named in any relief attempt, and not part of the Rouen proceedings. The documents are silent on any move he made, and years later he would spend heavily to stage mystery plays honoring her victories, most notably the Mystère du Siège d'Orléans.
What's a mystery play?
So a mystery to the people living in the Middle Ages at this time, the biggest mystery of them all is God's mystique, right? That's what a mystery is to them. So in his Mystère du Siège d'Orléans, he is basically vaunting her as a saint, long before she would ever be declared a saint. And it's very, very interesting because it isn't about her, it's about him and how brave he was and how many times he saved her life or how many battles he won for her or all of the glories for God that were achieved at Gilles de Rais' side in the presence of this saint. So that's what those plays were about. And we will get back to them because they are very, very interesting, and they cost him literally 3 fortunes. Remember all that money that he inherited? Well, he's going to spend it on stupid shit like cloth of gold for his soldiers and actual gold wings for the people in these plays. With Jeanne gone and the court's attention elsewhere, Gilles goes home with rank but no reins. The old hand which had once checked him, his grandfather Jean de Craon, dies, and Gilles begins to live like the wealthiest baron in Brittany, mortgaging and selling lands, mounting pageants, keeping chaplains and singers, paying alchemists to pull treasure from fire, to no success, obviously. When family wins a royal decree in 1435 that restrains further sales of his properties, he pivots harder into alchemy and darker rites, even as complaints pile up from neighbors and ducal officers he's offended. It's a descent you can read in ledgers, revenues assigned, annuities sold, castles pledged, and no one left to say no to the fanciest boy in Brittany. To circle back to his plays a little bit, he actually did put these on for over 5 months. He would feed every single person that would come to the show. He would charge no money for entry, and it would travel around France for a while. And it was a big, big hit, don't get me wrong, but a big, big hit that you're not charging money for equals a shitload of money spent and nothing coming back to you. So his family at this point, by 1435, are really pissed off that they're about to not inherit anything when he dies because he spent all the money. And again, 3 massive fortunes. When he rides to Chinon to meet with the Dauphin and Jeanne d'Arc, he's the richest man in Europe, just about. And he certainly has more money than the Duke of Brittany, and he certainly has more money than the Dauphin. So that means that he outspent the King of France in just a couple of years on stupid shit. So to say that he was bad with money is a bit of an understatement. But it wasn't just that he was bad at money. He was so arrogant and so enamored of this image that he was painting for himself as the right-hand man of a blessed saint. He just couldn't wait to share that image with the entire world. And it cost him 3 massive fortunes. And so now all he has left is the hope that alchemy will produce the gold that he has lost so quickly.
But he's working on his legacy or something like that, right? Is that the whole purpose, or is he just likes plays?
I think it's a little column A, column B, actually. I think that he is a fancy boy who really wants everybody to know how fancy he is and applaud him for his wealth. And the other thing about that, at this time frame in Europe, noble lords would compete against each other constantly. So, like, if your soldiers, if your knights are dressed the fanciest, if they've got the best horses, if they got the nicest steel, then, you know, your status goes up. It's kind of like if you buy a Mercedes and your friend buys a Bugatti, your friend wins, right? So that's what Gilles is up to. He's showing off. He's showing his massive wealth. He's showing how handsome and powerful and incredible he is. And on top of that, he is, promoting himself as the quote unquote protector and best friend of a saint.
And this all happens while his family and his heirs or the other people in his family look on and say, hey, that's our money too.
I mean, yes, it starts out kind of slowly and then it just like builds over time. But by the time his plays are being put on, his family's like, okay. The reason why he's selling off his castles is because he is going broke. And he's going broke at a rate, like, I cannot stress, you're not charging anyone in the country to come and see your play, but you are spending like all your money on costumes and actors and feasts and everything else. And you're not taking a sou in return. You're bound to go broke. You're just absolutely bound to go broke. So he figures he's just going to sell off a couple of castles and that'll be the end of it. But his family is like, yeah, no, we actually want to inherit that wealth when you pass. So we would appreciate it if you would stop spending all of our money and thank you.
So now he's turning to the dark arts.
Exactly. He is turning to alchemy. And he starts searching far afield for all of the alchemists and quote-unquote hedge wizards that he can find that are going to help him produce the sorcerer's stone that will give him the gold that he needs to live out his lavish lifestyle and dreams forever. And the story is really funny. I highly recommend, if you guys have not listened to Last Podcast on the Left, to definitely go listen to their 4-part series on Gilles de Rais because it is the absolute best thing I have ever heard. We don't have the kind of time to go into it, but essentially he hires the most ridiculous characters that you could possibly imagine. People who paint their eyes dark to appear more mysterious and like show up flapping capes like, I am a wizard and I will get you the gold that you require.
I went to high school.
I promise. Yeah. And the funny part is, like, he would invite these dudes in and a couple of them would come in and they would have dinner and they would promise him all of these things. And then they would just dip out with his money in the morning. So he would like give them money, or they would ask him for money and they'd be like, hey, as a down payment for me summoning these demons that are going to get you all this gold, can you just give me like 30 silver coins? And Gilles like, yeah, fuck it. Here you go. It gives him 30 silver coins, 2 pieces out. And Gilles like, damn it. No, I have to find another wizard fast. So long story short, Gilles went from being the Marshal of France, the most respected soldier of his time, feared, beloved, the right-hand man and protector of a potential saint, because she's not actually sainted at this time. She's still technically a criminal. Charles VII would actually pardon her later on in life because the people were pissed at him about this. I wonder why. And Gilles is spending all of his time blowing all of his money and basically just being a douche about the land. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, parish registers in the Pays de Rais, that is where he is actually from, begin to carry spare lines with new weight. Near Machecoul, that's one of the castles that he owns, remember, a boy sent to the smith is taken and does not return. By the castle of Tiffauges, a body is found in a ditch, the throat cut. Around Champtoussay, a girl is carried from a pasture and never seen again. The point of this is that children are starting to go missing. And they're starting to go missing from every single castle that he owns and takes up residence in on the regular. In fact, everywhere in France that he visits, children are going missing, and they're going missing at an alarming rate. Remember that the Duke of Brittany is Gilles' liege lord, and during this period of time, Gilles is still occupied helping the Duke of Brittany put down civil unrest and sieges and etc. But most of the time, Gilles hangs his hat at one of the castles that he owns. The peasants start talking about their children being seduced away from the fields, the taverns that they worked at, or just outright being invited into the castle to attend a meal with their liege lord, which would be Gilles de Rais. They would often be promised coin, they would be promised food, sweets, and fancy clothes, and sometimes the parents would tell their kids to go wait outside the gate of whichever castle Gilles was in residence in hopes that their child would be chosen so that their kid could bring home some money. A lot of those kids would never come home.
So this was almost common knowledge that kids were going out there. A lot of kids were disappearing and being hauled off, but they would still send their child out to like almost certain danger.
I mean, poverty is a bitch, you know? Like, if you're starving most of the year and your local liege lord is offering coin for a young boy to make him a servant in his household and really just like elevate them out of the destitution that they live in day to day, well, odds are the parents aren't going to say no to that. But to your point, yes, a lot of the parents would send their children purposefully to those gates in hopes that Gilles would pick them and they could bring home some coin for their families.
Was Gilles de Rais the only one doing this?
No.
Oh, so they all like,
Yes.
oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, when it comes to what you're saying, doing this, quote unquote, we will get to the this in a moment. But no, you know, it is kind of the habit of the lords and ladies of this time period to offer alms to the poor. So that is a very common sight. If a liege lord, a baron, a count, a duke is in residence at their house, they would, you know, the peasantry would send their children to the gates to receive food, bread, alms, etc. But in Gilles' case, he isn't just inviting the kids to have dinner or give them fancy clothes or coins just because, you know, out of the goodness of his heart. This is the part of the episode that I am going to go ahead and say, trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. If you do not want to hear about Gilles' supposed crimes, then please fast forward a few minutes. If you are still here, Gilles de Rais was a well-known pederast.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. And it was not a surprise to many of the people who lived on his lands that he would be on the hunt for handsome young boys and girls to take up to his castle. Now, I won't say that this wasn't semi-common in Europe at this time, but in Gilles' case, again, a lot of these kids are never going home again. And the parents would kind of understand that there was a chance of that the minute that his knights and his men came back to take up residence at one of his castles. But if your kid's attractive and he gets picked, you might not ever see him again. Yes, a lot of the parents knew. A lot of the parents understood that that was a possibility. But if you've got 5 mouths to feed and you're starving and you don't believe that you're going to make it through the winter, I think desperation makes people do things they would never otherwise do or accept situations they would never normally accept.
And it wasn't 100%. And so like the kid could actually get dinner and bring home a basket of whatever was in the castle that day.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
okay. So there was a chance, a hope that they could, you know, get ahead, get a good bargain out of it. But there was also a chance that their child would never return.
Or they would find them later.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah. So how we know that Gilles committed crimes is that these remains were found. A lot. They were found for years, in fact. And it is shocking to people of our time period to think, oh my God, how could you find the bodies of dead children and not do anything about it or not go see the authorities and demand for it to be stopped, especially when you know who is committing the crime? Well, the thing is that these people are technically Gilles' property. And furthermore, his diddling of children or the missing children in general didn't matter to the royals and to the aristocrats of this time period. and it certainly wasn't making much of a difference to the church. Essentially, if you are a serf, if you're a peasant, and you live at your job is to work the land, right? And you live at the very bottom of this pyramid. The law at that point for them is Gilles and any men that he appoints to manage his fields, manage his books, or manage his castle. Gilles then answers to the Duke of Brittany, who answers to the King of France, which is Charles VII. So the odds that a peasant missing a child is going to get an audience with anyone who's actually going to be able to do anything about it is slim to zero. And honestly, no one cared about these people, apart from like Jean, who is one of them. Gilles had all of the license in the world to do whatever he wanted to do, so long as he didn't piss off the Duke of Brittany, he didn't piss off the church, and he didn't piss off the king.
Well, that's pretty terrible. At least he knew what the rules were, but I guess for everybody at the bottom, that's definitely not the best deal.
No,
So
why not?
going back to Joan of Arc, her being able to inspire the military is probably in part because she could inspire the peasantry
Yeah,
join.
very
Okay,
much so.
so she almost made the army
Yeah, I
by
would
her
think so.
presence. Okay, all right. A lot of this is coming clear for
Yeah, no. I mean, she definitely re-energized the entire country. I mean, this young girl with crazy eyes basically is walking around this tiny village. She starts talking about how these saints are telling her that it's her job to save France from the English. And these people had been tortured and murdered and assaulted and completely devastated by the English and the Burgundians and the constant war for over 100 years. So when they see somebody like this appear, and I mean, every report I've ever read about Jeanne, including Gilles, is that she really had something. There was something about her that really made you feel like you were in the presence of something divine. So yeah, she inspired everyone, and she especially inspired the peasantry to feel like they mattered and their voices mattered.
Okay. So where are they finding these bodies? You said there were a lot of them. Just inside the castle, or where were they?
So a lot of the bodies were found, they were buried in the woods beyond each one of the castles. They would be found in midden heaps. They would be found in privies. They would be found buried underneath the cesspits. It's pretty awful. And keep in mind, they're not finding, like, I don't want to be gross. Again, trigger warning, trigger warning, trigger warning. But they're not finding the fleshy bits. They're finding bones that have been hacked to bits. And I have to stress this because there's a lot of people that think that Gilles was innocent. These were found for years. 4 years. So even though nobody technically, when I say nobody, I mean nobody who had any control over the law, quote unquote, cared too much about these kids, that didn't mean that their parents didn't try to find them. And it didn't mean that their parents wouldn't make accusations. They did all the time. Just nobody was listening until they did. And remember, Gilles is the lord of the land. It's really, really hard to accuse the lord of the land who owns your house, owns your food, owns your clothes on your back of killing your kid, So, like, they have to go through the church. And the church at this point is not doing much to stop Gilles. In May 1440, finally, amid a property quarrel at Saint-Étienne-de-Mermort, Gilles seizes a cleric at the altar, an open sacrilege. That offense lands on the desk of Bishop Jean de Marestois in Nantes. So finally, Gilles has crossed the wrong man. And he didn't just accost this priest. He rode into the church astride his warhorse, swinging a flail and threatening the man's life. Bishop Marestois opens an inquiry. The charges are officially heresy and sacrilege, and with it, the right to summon witnesses and take depositions without leave from the local liege lord, which would be Gilles. Officials ride out with notaries, they sit in sacristies and manor halls and ask structured questions. Who was taken? When was they last seen? Where was a body found? And they write it all down.
There are 3 people this guy isn't supposed to piss off. That's the king, the church, and his lord. He decides his best option is to ride to the bishop and then threaten the guy.
No, he didn't threaten the bishop. He threatened one of his priests.
That's the same thing, though.
I mean, in a way, yes. According to ecclesiastical law, yeah, it is. So it was an incredibly stupid, narrow-sighted thing to do for Gilles. But I think that Gilles probably thought he was above the law, like a lot of them do, you know? And maybe he wasn't afraid of the church at this point, you know? He's got a bunch of wizards staying in his.
That is true. That is true. I do think that you're correct that when you've been getting away with reprehensible things for so long, it just seems like there are no real rules for you. So whatever your knee-jerk reaction is, just go and do it. There's no consideration, or if any fallout happens, it's somebody else's job to clean it.
Right. And the thing is too, I think that so he has one of his wizards, one of the wizard guys that are staying at his house. One of them is a man named Francois Prelati. Has Gilles believing that he has summoned a demon named Baron who is going to give him all of the wealth and power that Gilles feels like he deserves. And it must have been like a long con because Gilles didn't kill him. He wasn't expelled from the castle. And he just kept promising him that he was going to see results eventually. So I think that he just believed in his mind when he attacked that priest that, you know, I've got a demon that's totally got my back. So what the hell am I afraid of some stupid priest? I can just, you know, call Baron to come and handle this for me. Even though I'm sure you're getting the gist that at no point whatsoever was gold ever a product of any of the meetings with Prelati. So I guess he was feeling pretty metal when he broke down that church door and captured that priest. But yeah, no, wrong enemy to make, the church at this time, because they were very, very powerful. And some might say they were even more powerful than the king. So bad decision on Gilles' part. So by early autumn in 1440, the dossier on Gilles de Rais is getting pretty thick. The Duke of Brittany involves himself in the case, and it's now a national affair. Even Charles, who in no small part owes his throne to Gilles de Rais, he is also signing off on the trial that would follow. A squad arrests Gilles de Rais at Machecoul, and others seize his servants Henriet and Poitou. These are two household men who literally know where the bodies are buried because they were the ones doing the burying for Gilles. Gilles is taken to Nantes on the Ile de Biesse and tried. He faces two tribunals at once, the ecclesiastical court for heresy and invoking demons, and the secular court for abduction and murder. One more time, if you don't want to hear about Gilles' crimes, then I would suggest that you skip ahead a couple of minutes. If you are still here, Gilles de Rais was accused by public rumor of raping and murdering numerous children, as well as of demonic invocations and pacts. At the same time, the secular justice system proceeded to hear the same witnesses, the official charges being murdering children, sodomy, invoking demons, offending the divine majesty, and heresy. His servants Henriet and Poitou, as well as several others who were complicit in helping him find children, were indicted in both courts.
Not only is Gilles de Rais, but his paid accomplices are all brought in on charges from these two courts. I noticed that you said that heresy was one of the charges, which seems to be the one that they use to, if we don't have any actual evidence against you, we're going to say you're a heretic. So is that kind of code for we don't have any evidence?
No, they did in fact have evidence. So they did find remains. They found remains at all of his castles. They just found them over a period of years. So it's not like they had like a big pile of bones that they could drag into the court. A lot of these bones had been interred. People had been buried. Parents had retrieved whatever they could retrieve. And again, remember, these parents were ignored for years and years and years. So they don't have a whole lot of physical evidence. They just have the records to prove that the physical evidence had been found. So even though they don't have a lot of physical evidence, they are going on a lot of hearsay. That hearsay is backed up by the record.
It sounds like Gilles de Rais was an actually really bad guy. He had other people. Yeah, exactly. They were finding, children's bodies around his estates, which, points to not being somebody you want to hang out with. He had a demon that he felt that he controlled. He was bringing in.
He had the promise of a demon.
Exactly. He was kicking down the doors of the
With a mace
religious elite.
flail. Can you imagine that shit?
That would be.
That's pretty metal. I don't have to say that's pretty metal.
Yeah. Almost literally. But so he's got all of these, negative marks against him, but he was behind supporting and like fighting with Joan of Arc, who he admitted and he said that she had a religious fervor that inspired him, that inspired the crowd. He, had all of these different plays made that, polished off his name or, made him look better standing beside the servant, the sword of God. Like, was that all just lip service? Like, yeah, why did he attach his name to Joan of Arc, this symbol of purity and righteousness, while still trying to resurrect or summon demons?
Well, because I think that he was a religious man. I think that most people during this time period were religious people, and Gilles was no exception. I think that part of it is because he was galvanized by Jeanne. Jeanne performed a miracle. She made a country that was ready to quit, that was ready to just surrender to the English and live under an English king and deal with whatever they threw at them forever. She took those people and she gave them a reason to fight. And Jeanne was only active for about 2 years. So she was 17 years old when she went to Chinon. And by the time that she is executed, she's 19. So it's only a 2-year period. She did so much. Like Charles was crowned king, and the English are no longer in possession of Orléans, and large tracts of the country are now free of English soldiers. So a lot of the fighting, the 100 Years' War is over. So I think to Gilles, yeah, she was a miracle worker, and he was a miracle worker because he was beside her and he got to, bask in her quote unquote glory. But also, we have to think about who this guy is. He is the wealthiest man, at least in France, and he's handsome and he's artistic, or at least he believes he's artistic, and he's, kissed by God, as it were. So I just don't know that he lived in reality. And in all of the crimes that he confesses to here in a bit, and by the way, that is definitely going to be some triggering stuff. So if you're not prepared for that, maybe just read the show notes. But, all of the stuff that he's going to confess to, I don't think is beneath him at all. In this particular instance, this is one guy who confessed to a bunch of stuff after he was tortured, not because he was tortured, but because they threatened him with excommunication. So Gilles definitely believed in God, and he definitely wanted to get into heaven. So it wasn't the torture that made him confess to all of the things that he's going to confess to. It was the idea that he was not going to be allowed to get into heaven, and his name would be cast among the devils forever.
At this point, he has been charged, he has been tortured, and now he's confessing. Earlier you said that the peasantry were just kind of part of his property. So that wouldn't really land him in the type of trouble that he seems to be in. So what else, other than just, being a horrible, like, pederast, what else did he confess to?
He confessed to trying to summon demons to, replenish his wealth, for one thing. And even though we are all aware that he did not succeed and that he was likely being taken for a hell of a ride there, he still confessed to it, which was definitely going to end his life no matter what. So at this point, he probably just didn't feel like he had much to lose. But this is where we get into the very triggering territory. So you're going to want to go ahead and just read the show notes if you're not into hearing about these crimes. They are severe. Go ahead and go now. So if you're still here, Gilles doesn't just confess to murdering children or interfering with children. He would invite them in for a meal. He would have them bathed. He would have them clothed in beautiful cloth of velvet and gold. And he would bring them to his favorite chapel. And he would cut off their heads and essay the bodies while they were still warm. And then he would go and do it again the very next day. He confessed to doing this over 140 times, and some believe that he was taking as many as 2 children a night for a period of 8 years. So you can go ahead and do the math there as to how many children that could possibly be. I don't believe that this is necessarily the gospel truth. And you do have to take into account the fact that a lot of that comes from his two servants, Henri and Poitou, who supposedly buried all of the bodies. But he didn't disagree with their confessions either. He wasn't like declaring his innocence or screaming and shouting like, how dare you accuse me of such things? Because again, I don't think that he thought he did anything wrong. And it wasn't until he was threatened with excommunication that he actually decided to confess to any of this. So I think that he was more concerned about his immortal soul than he was about being accused of murdering children or what that would do to his name and etc. He knew he was cooked. So I think that at the very end, he was like, hell with it. I might as well just tell them everything. But then again, you get a lot of people who think that he was innocent and that he would confess to literally anything under torture. And those people have a point, I can't say one way or the other. Confessions taken under extreme torture are notoriously unreliable. And there is some evidence to suggest that maybe the kids are just kids that died in the house. Maybe the kids were just kids that, I don't know, fell out of a window or the parents just lost track of and they ended up passing away of hunger. We don't know for sure. But according to the witness testimony that was recorded over a period of years, when the remains were found, they were not found intact. They were found cut by a blade. Gilles de Rais would be executed on the 26th of October, 1440. He was hanged, then burned, just to be sure. Contemporary notes say his body was cut down before the flames finished their work and buried at Carmelite Church. Henri and Poitou, their ashes were scattered on the wind.
Okay, so he's dead now. Did you say it was over 100 children he was accused of killing?
The ecclesiastical sentence speaks of 140 children or more. So the secular sentence avoids a precise count and says many small children. Parish books don't give a full roll. One way or the other, it's a range. Scores of victims over multiple years.
Like still, scores. That's a big number.
Yeah. Scores.
Yeah, it is.
Guys. So 20 times multiple years equals how many people, So I think that the conservative estimate of 100 to 140 children is probably pretty spot on. If you're on team Gilles was innocent, then perhaps, one of his men could have been the culprit or one of his servants or something like that. But I'm going to go ahead and kibosh that. My opinion, we wouldn't be finding the remains of multiple children at multiple castles over a period of multiple years if it was anyone but Gilles de Rais who committed those crimes. And I'm good to die on that hill. So I don't think that Gilles de Rais was innocent. Do I believe that he killed as many as, some people like to ascribe to him? This number of 400 to 600 is just absurd. No, I don't think that many children died by his hand, because even though the church and maybe the other nobles and the king didn't so much care about the peasants, the fear that the peasants would rise up against you is a thing in Europe for a reason. So I don't think that it happened as often as that. But I do think that it did, in fact, happen. Because many records aren't just taken from where he lived. A lot of them are from places that he stayed. So if he checked into an inn, for example, during one of his plays, that night a child would go missing. And remember, news travels slowly at this time. So how would people in Rennes, for example, know what they're finding at Machecoul? They would not be speaking to each other. And a lot of these people did not have the ability to read or write. So how would they be writing letters to one another? And that's really gross, but fascinating, because it's just his relationship with Jeanne that makes this so much worse.
Right? I totally agree.
With no education to speak of, she couldn't even read when she came to court. And she inspired an entire nation to fight back against their oppressors. And she won a lot. I think she only lost like 2 or 3 battles tops. She won every battle she was a part of for the most part. That's like 9. And that's incredible. That's incredible. So Gilles is largely left out of the histories for obvious reasons, right? You're not going to have a lot of conversations about Joan d'Arc and then have a conversation about Gilles de Rais in the same breath. But by all accounts, he was a brilliant soldier, an excellent strategist, and he was an incredibly talented tactician. But in my opinion, at least, he was also a murderer. So you can't really separate that out of his story, I think. And yeah, he would be the inspiration for the fairy tale Bluebeard. And Bluebeard, as you know, is a fairy tale that I have told you several times, CJ. And yeah, it's a really dark one. And if you don't know about it, guys, then I suggest that you go look it up. It's pretty creepy. So that's it. The guy who used to be the protector and BFF of a saint was, in fact, one of the worst human beings to ever live. Even if you believe that he was innocent and these charges were stitched up, I just would like to see your explanation for all of the remains that were found over the period of years in which they were found. And regardless, the guy blew through 3 fortunes just to brag about himself. And that is top-tier dickhead behavior.
But still, I mean, on the other hand, without this guy, there would be no France.
That's an argument to be made as well. I'm pretty sure Marcus Parks from last podcast on the left made an entire speech about how there'd be no United States of America if France was not, in fact, an independent country and able to donate a bunch of money.
That is true. That is true.
He made this whole thing like, Gilles de Rais, mass murderer, friend of a saint, but also responsible for the Declaration of Independence. And, he did it a lot more eloquently than that, but I laughed until I almost dropped, so... I do want to make a note that the people who believe that Gilles de Rais was innocent are really, really, really standing on business for him. And they even did like a mock trial in 1992 in Paris. And of course, it was staged before a friendly panel and it pronounced him not guilty and it sent headlines around the world and all of this stuff. But again, I am sus and I do not think so, given the evidence that's actually before us. Now, some people would say that witness testimony is not reliable, and I would be one of those people most of the time. However, it is the time period that captures my attention and my focus. If something is being reported over and over and over again in records, after a little bit, you have to start asking, okay, what's there? What is actually happening here? So yes, there is a good chance that Gilles de Rais could have been innocent of unaliving all of the children that he supposedly unalived. I don't think that makes him innocent by any stretch of the imagination. Let's not forget that this man had the opportunity to save Joan d'Arc and didn't. He might not have been at Compiègne when she was being executed, but he wasn't far, and if he wanted to go and get her, by God, he could have. Remember, he had 200 knights at his beck and call. I think his plays weren't about Jean at all. I think they were about him and his glory and his victory at Orléans, making Jean merely stage dressing for the Black Baron of Machecoul. Yay, we did it! We recorded an entire episode. I'm very proud of us right now. Are you proud of us?
I'm very proud of you. You did a fantastic job over there on the mixing board and keeping us on track. A lot of people don't know a lot of stuff got cut out. Most of my tangents, a lot of different things that kind of just didn't fit. But this was a lot of fun and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really happy that I cut out all of the fart jokes and all of the other silly shit that shouldn't.
They were high quality, very quality.
And yeah, if you take issue with any of the things that we discussed in this episode today, we're human and we're bound to make a few mistakes. But I'm going to stand on business when it comes to my opinion about Gilles, and you're not going to change it. So I'm not going to change yours. You're not going to change mine. Let's just respect each other's opinions. Okay, guys? So yeah, I'm really proud of us that we managed to get this episode done, and I hope it's not too terrible. If the sound is awful, we promise to work hard to make it better.
I'm glad that you decided to try to say everything in French. I did not even attempt to do so.
We're about to be in France, and I'm pretty sure they're going to stone me as soon as we get to the airport. They're going to be like, oh, God, there's that woman. She can't speak French for shit.
Heresy.
Get her.
Heresy is a common, very popular charge.
Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we'll see you guys next week with another crazy story.
All right, bye, guys.
If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, leave a brief review, and share it with a friend. That's how we grow. Links and sources are in the notes. For updates, you could find me at LM Revere Author on TikTok and Instagram. Also, please follow the Time and Tales podcast on YouTube. See you next time.